Alright guys, huge drama today in Formula 1, and it's not Christian Horner versus Toto Wolff, it's not Lewis Hamilton versus Max Verstappen, it's the ownership, the top brass over at the Formula 1 management side versus the president of the FIA, the governing body, Mohammed bin Sulayem. An explosive letter they reveal over the past few hours here, suggesting his comments yesterday were deeply unacceptable and that the FIA may be liable for any damage caused to their business. Definitely these relationships are more sour than ever they have been, especially after only a 13-month presidency that Mohammed bin Sulayem has had so far. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new as always, I'd greatly appreciate it. It all began here a few days ago where rumours were circulating that the Saudi Arabian sovereign wealth fund that's been investing in everything lately wanted to buy Formula 1 for well over $20 billion. Now whether that's a reasonable number or not, I don't know. All we know is a few years ago Liberty Media purchased Formula 1 in 2016 for $8 billion. Now the sport's grown a lot since then, they've done some great things, so obviously some sort of exit plan for Liberty Media will be the case at some point in the future. They're probably considering offers they will arrive at, but you know, they obviously declined this particular offer. Doesn't mean though that this Saudi Arabian sovereign wealth fund is not going to try again, raise their offer or whatever down the line. Whether that's good for the sport seems doubtful, and Liberty Media will consider all the kind of consequences of that, but at some point they will probably accept some offer from somewhere and move on from the sport after the great growth they've enjoyed over the last several years. That's where this started a few days ago. Obviously, the Liberty Media declines this, and then Mohammed bin Sulayem, this is the FIA president, so not directly involved in the management of Formula 1, but in part of the governing body. His predecessor, Jean Todt, didn't really say much publicly. He was very much reserved, didn't really kind of contradict anything that the F1 guys were saying, because at the end of the day, the Formula 1 management guys over at Liberty Media, they own the sport. Now, Mohammed bin Sulayem yesterday made these comments. We looked at them in a video, and I thought they were kind of surprising. I don't disagree with part of what he's saying here, but I mentioned yesterday that it doesn't really feel like it's his place to be making these comments. Now, we'll come back to the first tweet in a second, but he goes on to say any potential buyer is advised to apply common sense, consider the greater good of the sport, and come with a clear, sustainable plan, not just a lot of money. You know, I think a lot of Formula 1 fans would agree with this. It's our duty to consider what the future impact will be, etc., etc. But I was like, it seems interesting from bin Sulayem because he's the president of the FIA. He doesn't exactly have a say in how Formula 1's ownership and Liberty Media decide to make their decisions on this. And he actually has no remit for this at all, as in there is nothing in the contract that says the FIA have any involvement in any such discussions. The key point that I kind of glossed over at the time was this tweet here where he says the FIA is cautious about an alleged inflated price tag of $20 billion being put on F1. Now, the word inflated is the key point here because that implies that in his opinion, Formula 1 is not worth $20 billion. He reckons that's an overbid by the Saudi Arabian sovereign wealth fund or whatever. Very interesting statement to make, given the fact that his organization, the FIA, is partnered with Formula 1. And the Formula 1 guys saw this and were like, hang on a second, our partner here, the president of our partnership who does the governance right for our sport, is saying that that value for money is inflated, i.e. what the market might think we're worth is actually more than we're actually worth. And it's our partner stating that, i.e. hurting the, value of our brands. That's a rather big deal. The funny thing is to me about this is just a public tweet, right, that bin Sulayem put out there. It's not like this was an official press release that he did with the FIA. He just chucked out a couple of tweets and, they've not been deleted yet, and maybe they won't be. But, Formula 1's lawyers saw this and were like, hang on a second, this is, in their opinion, overstepping the jurisdiction and threatening the sport's value. So this was then revealed to the BBC and also to Sky Sports. And just even I thought it was funny the fact that there was another linked article in this article where they were talking about the FIA being accused of suppressing drivers' freedom of speech. There's been a lot of drama lately around the FIA and, friction between the ownership and the governing body that has not really been the case to this extent for several years. Pretty much since bin Sulayem's taken over, it's got a lot worse in this way. And, he's been a lot more vocal than his predecessor was, and I don't really think that's helping his organization. So, Sasha Woodward-Hill and Renee Wilm, who are the chief legal officer for Formula 1 and for Formula 1's own Liberty Media, respectively, they co-authored a letter that they sent out, effectively, that's been revealed by various sources, and this is what it goes on to say. So, yes, obviously, since he took over at the end of 2021, very much a strained relationship has ensued, and they went on to make very clear that Formula 1 has the exclusive right to exploit the commercial rights in the FIA F1 World Championship. The FIA has given unequivocal undertakings that it will not do anything to prejudice the ownership, management, and/or exploitation of those rights. It says that his remarks that we just saw on Twitter, made from the FIA president's official social media account, interfere with our rights in an unacceptable manner. The circumstances in which the FIA would have any role in the change of control of the Formula One group are very limited indeed. Any suggestion or implication to the contrary, or that any potential purchaser of Formula One business is required to consult with the FIA is wrong. So we'll just dissect that for a second. Very interesting, right? So they're basically saying that any comments from his part on the fact that maybe it was too much money, that that number that was, well, associated with Formula One, that also kind of implies, as we'll see in a second, some degree of inside knowledge on the fact, but it also implies, for a kind of casual reader of the statements that Ben Sulayem made, that, you know, his organization has some actual involvement in this process. They're saying, no, you're the governing body. We have to pay you money to do stuff like this, and you're sitting there hurting our brand. What are you playing at, mate? Because, you know, we're the guys that actually own this thing. We can decide to sell it. You have no involvement at all. They say there are very limited circumstances in which the FIA would actually be able to get involved, and, you know, any suggestion to the contrary is wrong. They then go on to say, commenting on the value of a listed entity, especially claiming or implying possession of inside knowledge while doing so, risks causing substantial damage to the shareholders and the investors of that entity, not to mention potential exposure to serious regulatory consequences. To the degree that these comments damage the value of Liberty Media Corporation, the FIA may be liable as a result, concluding by saying that they hope and trust it won't be necessary to address this issue again. But still, I mean, that final statement there is quite damning as well, stating that by saying that it was an inflated figure, Ben Sulayem is implying that he knows something maybe that the public do not about why it shouldn't be valued as highly as it was. You know, if you say inflated, he's obviously giving his opinion there. Now, where's he getting that opinion from? He obviously has more information about how valuable Formula One might be than the public does. So, you know, it does risk causing damage to the entity and the shareholders of said entity, and therefore the lawyers from Formula One are like, hang on a second, mate, we're not going to stand for this, and if it does affect the value of our company in any way, then the FIA will be liable for that. Especially dramatic, of course, given the fact that they are directly partnered with Formula One. So it's an absolute messy situation, right? I don't think Ben Sulayem's mouth helps him here, because the guy cannot shut up, right? I mean, he talks about everything all the time. He's been involved in plenty of drama recently, and you could argue that his predecessor, Jean Todt, who completed 12 years in this role, was, very reserved, kept himself to himself and his organization to themselves, did the job as best they saw fit, but didn't get involved too much beyond that. But it's felt like the last few years, F1 and the FIA have been diverging a bit. There's been a fair bit of drama and friction between both organizations, and I don't know what the future holds there, right? Does the Formula One guys somehow break off from the FIA? I don't know how that would work or how that would operate, but they're trying to certainly strong-arm the FIA in some way or another. The FIA and Ben Sulayem have made statements like this repeatedly over the last few weeks to imply that maybe they have more power than they actually do, or try and regain some foothold in the relationship. But yeah, right now it's not looking pretty for all involved. And I mean, it's kind of funny, really, because usually the drama we get in the off-season or during the season is driver or team-related, but the drama right now in Formula One goes right at the very top, between the top brass at Formula One management and then the ownership over at Liberty Media and the governing body. And even it wasn't long ago when Ben Sulayem was calling out Christian Horner live on stage. Maybe he had a bit too much to drink or whatever, right? And, they had the awards ceremony and he was talking about, it wasn't confusing, we got the rules right, all this stuff. It's don't think he really helps himself. And tweet your thoughts on that in the comments section below, but I'm sure this isn't going to be the end of it, because every few weeks at this point, we get more drama involving the governing body and Formula One themselves. So, look, it's not guaranteed they're going to sell or anything anytime soon, but I think understandably, if they're looking at their partner damaging the image of their brands, they're like, maybe we shouldn't be partnered with these people, or if they are, then we will make them pay as a result of things. Now, I wanted to mention quickly on that topic that Christian Horner was debating heavily on stage with Mohammed Ben Sulayem. We remember after the Japanese Grand Prix at Suzuka, where Verstappen won and then won the title in bizarre circumstances. Basically what happened there was, because after the Belgian Grand Prix at Spa, which was an absolute disaster in 2021, they changed the rules to say, okay, if a race does not reach full distance and is then called off, then depending on the amount of laps that were completed, they would then give the drivers a certain selection of points, either 25%, 50%, all this type of stuff. But the rules actually weren't written quite along those lines. The rules said that any start, as long as the race concludes under green flag conditions, then regardless of how many laps are raced, then it still gives full points. And that's why it was a bit dramatic, because they raced less than half race distance at Suzuka, but they still gave, or pretty much around that ballpark anyway, but they still gave out full points, which is controversial and not really the intention of the rules, because you could theoretically, according to the rules, race one lap of racing after having the race been red flagged for 3 hours, do one lap, but it finishes under a green flag, and therefore by the rule book, like it's full points to the winner, which is what happened here for Verstappen, and that's why he won the title controversially, confusingly, for sure, for everyone. Even the teams didn't know what was going on there, because it wasn't the intention of the rules, it was just the way they were poorly written by the FIA. Who's surprised? So they're trying to change that now to make sure that it actually does enact the way that it was intended to enact. But just one more nice piece of FIA drama to close out the video, and just the final thing here I wanted to mention from Haas, confirming that Pietro Fittipaldi will return as their test and reserve driver for the upcoming season. But very much enjoyed your thoughts on all this stuff in the comment section below. Hit the like button if you enjoyed, subscribe if you're new, take care, and I'll see you next time.